My stepfather removed my name from the business my mother built while I was at her funeral. The partnership agreement said otherwise. My name is Sera Quinn, and I was 34. The Saturday morning we buried my mother, and my phone buzzed in my coat pocket during the eulogy. I did not look at it. I was standing at a lectern in a church I had attended since childhood, reading words I had written at 2 in the morning the night before about a woman who had built something real from nothing, and who had done it while raising me alone, and who had been the most competent person I had ever known. My phone buzzed again. I finished the eulogy. I sat back down in the front pew. My stepfather Douglas sat beside me. He put his hand on my arm. He said that was beautiful. I said thank you. The service continued. At the graveside an hour later, my phone buzzed a third time. I kept it in my pocket. I watched them lower my mother into the ground. I held the single white rose the funeral home had given me. I did not cry at the graveside. I had done my crying at 2 in the morning writing the eulogy. By morning I was the specific version of empty that exists on the other side of the deepest grief. Not numb, just spent, the way a room feels after a storm has moved through it. We drove back to the house for the reception. 40 people in my mother's living room. Food that neighbors had brought. The specific warm hum of a community gathering around a loss. I stood near the kitchen and accepted condolences and said the right things, and at some point I stepped into the hallway and finally took my phone from my pocket. 3 notifications, all from the state business registry's automated alert system. I had set up alerts on my mother's business 18 months ago. Standard practice. Any change to the registered information triggered a notification. The first notification had arrived at 9:42 in the morning, approximately 40 minutes after the funeral service began. It said, "Amendment filed. Marsh Quinn Creative Services, LLC. Member information updated." The second had arrived at 10:15. It said, "Amendment filed. Marsh Quinn Creative Services, LLC. Business name updated." The third had arrived at 10:51. It said, "Amendment filed. Marsh Quinn Creative Services, LLC. Registered agent updated. 3 amendments, filed between 9:42 and 10:51 on the morning of my mother's funeral, while I was at the lectern reading her eulogy, while she was being lowered into the ground. I stood in the hallway of my mother's house. I looked at the 3 notifications. Then I walked to the study, my mother's study, the room where she had built her business for 19 years. I opened her filing cabinet. I found the partnership agreement. I opened it to page 1. I read the first clause. Then I called my attorney. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever been erased from something while you were too busy grieving to watch, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My mother's name was Claire Quinn, and she built Marsh Quinn Creative Services from a freelance graphic design contract she landed in her kitchen when I was 8 years old. She had been a graphic designer for a large agency for 9 years. She had left when the agency restructured and eliminated her department and handed her a severance check and a generic reference letter. She had come home that Friday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table for approximately 20 minutes. Then she had opened her laptop and started working. That was my mother. She did not process through stillness. She processed through motion. She built the business the way she built everything, by starting before she was ready and figuring out the rest as she went. First client was a small restaurant that needed a new menu design. Second was a dentist's office that needed new patient literature. Third was a regional nonprofit that needed a complete brand refresh and could not afford a large agency. She charged fairly. She delivered exactly what she promised. She answered every email the same day it arrived. She built a reputation the only way a reputation gets built, through the specific compound interest of doing good work consistently over many years. By the time I was in college, she had 8 regular clients and 2 part-time employees. By the time I graduated, she had 22 clients and a studio space she leased 2 miles from home. By the time I had been working as an accountant for 4 years, she had 40 clients, 6 full-time employees, and a business valued by her own most recent assessment at approximately $640,000 as a going concern. She had built it. Every client relationship, every design system, every employee she had hired and trained and retained, every piece of it hers. I want to be specific about what my role had been in that business. Not a large role, a specific one. From the time I was 24, I had been the business's accountant, not on staff, not as an employee, as her accountant in the specific arrangement of a daughter who had professional skills her mother needed and who provided them without charging her, because that was what made sense. I did her books. I filed her taxes. I reviewed her contracts. I advised on her financial structure. I was the person she called when a client was late paying and she needed to know her options. I was the person she called when she was considering expanding and needed to model the numbers. I was the person whose name was in the partnership agreement, not as an employee, as a partner, a minority partner, 20%. My mother held 80%. She had structured it that way 3 years before she died. Not because I had asked, because she had thought carefully about what the business needed and had decided it needed me in it formally. She had said, "I want your name on this." She had said, "Not because I need you to run it, because I need someone who cannot be removed from it without a process." She had said it the way she said things she had thought about carefully, plainly, without elaboration, with the specific economy of a woman who knew what she meant and trusted me to understand it. I had understood it. I had not known yet what she was protecting me from. I understood now. Douglas Hart arrived in my mother's life when I was 29. She had been alone since I was 6. 23 years of raising me and building a business and maintaining a life that was full without requiring a center that was not herself. She had dated occasionally, nothing that lasted. Not because she was unavailable, because she had specific standards and specific patience, and she was willing to wait for something real rather than settle for something convenient. Douglas felt real. I want to be fair about that. He was 60 to her 57, retired, 2 adult children who lived in other states, warm, present, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would. He made my mother laugh, not the polite social laugh she deployed at events, the genuine one, the one I had heard my whole life in the kitchen when something genuinely surprised her. He made her laugh that laugh, and I told myself that mattered more than my reservations. My reservations were professional. I am an accountant. I notice when people ask specific financial questions under the cover of general interest. Douglas asked about the business in the way I recognized from client situations, not curious assessing. How many employees? What the client retention rate was, whether she had thought about what happened to it when she was ready to retire, whether she had a succession plan. I noted the questions. I said nothing. My mother said nothing. We both noticed. We had a conversation about it once. She said she knew what he was doing. She said she had handled it. She said, "The partnership agreement has your name on it." She said, "Nothing happens to this business without you." I said I understood. She said, "I am not worried." She said, "I have it handled." She said, "Now stop being an accountant for 5 minutes and tell me if you think he makes me happy." I said, "Yes." I said, "He makes you happy." She said, "That is all I needed to know." She married him 14 months later. The cancer arrived 8 months after the wedding. Not dramatically. A routine scan that produced a follow-up call, that produced an appointment, that produced the word aggressive in a sentence I will never unhear. My mother received it the way she received everything, by going home and opening her laptop and starting to work. She called me that evening. Her voice was steady. She said, "I need to talk to you about the business." I said, "Okay." She said, "Not tonight." She said, "Come Saturday." She said, "Bring your work notebook." I said, "I always brought it." She said, "Good." She said, "This is going to be fine." She meant the documents, not the diagnosis. We both knew that. The Saturday meeting was 4 hours. We went through everything. The will, the healthcare directive, the power of attorney. And at the end, she opened the partnership agreement and put it flat on the table, and she said, "I want you to read the dissolution clause." I read it. The dissolution clause required the written consent of both partners for any change to the partnership structure. Both partners. Me and her. Any change. I looked at her. She looked at me. She said, "Douglas cannot remove you without your signature." She said, "I have made sure of that." She said, "If anything happens to me, the business stays in the partnership until both remaining partners agree on a transition." She said, "That means you have to agree." She said, "That means he cannot move without you." I said, "Mom." She said, "I know what I am doing." She said, "I built this for 19 years. She said, "I am not going to let it become something I did not intend because I did not put the right language in the right document." She said, "The language is right." She said, "The document is filed." She said, "You are protected." I said, "I know." I said, "Thank you." She said, "You do not have to thank me." She said, "It is your business too." She said, "I made sure of that." She said, "Now close the folder." She said, "Let us talk about something else." We talked about something else for the rest of the afternoon. She died 11 months later. On a Thursday morning. In the studio she had built. She had gone in that morning because there was a client presentation she had been preparing and she had wanted to finish it. She died at her desk, in the room where she had built everything. I cannot think of a more honest ending for a woman like her. I want to tell you about the 11 months between that Saturday meeting and the Thursday morning because they were the most important months of the business's life. She used them, not to wind down, to transmit. She introduced me to every client formally, not as her daughter, as her partner. She said, "Sera Quinn, my business partner and the person who will be your point of contact going forward." Some clients already knew me, some did not. All of them shook my hand and looked at me with the specific evaluating attention of people deciding whether to extend their trust to someone new, and most of them decided yes because my mother was standing beside me, and my mother's judgment was the currency the business ran on. She gave me the business the way she had built it, one relationship at a time, with the specific deliberateness of a woman who understood that what she had built was not a logo and a client list, but a network of trust, and that trust had to be transferred personally. She also gave me something else, something I had not expected. She gave me her perspective on Douglas. She said it once. On a Tuesday evening when I had come by to go over some quarterly numbers, and she was tired and less guarded than usual, she said, "I think I married him too soon." She said, "Not because he is a bad man." She said, "Because I did not know him long enough to know what he wanted." She said, "I know now." She said, "And the documents are correct." She said, "So it does not matter what he wants." I said, "Mom." She said, "I am tired." She said, "Let us finish the numbers." We finished the numbers. She was right about the documents. She was right about everything. The notification arrived at 9:42, while I was at the lectern. By the time I was standing in the hallway of her house reading it, Douglas had filed 3 amendments. I went to the study. I opened the filing cabinet. The partnership agreement was exactly where it had always been, behind the tax files, in front of the client contracts, tabbed and labeled in my mother's handwriting. I opened it. I read the dissolution clause. Any change to the partnership structure, including, but not limited to the addition or removal of partners, amendment of ownership percentages, or transfer of membership interest, requires the written consent of all existing partners. All existing partners, me. Douglas had filed 3 amendments without my signature, without my knowledge, without my consent. While I was reading my mother's eulogy, I held the partnership agreement. I looked at the study, her desk, her design books on the shelf, her client files in the cabinet, the framed first logo she had ever designed professionally, a restaurant menu header for a place that had been closed for 10 years, but that she had kept framed because it was where it had started. I took the partnership agreement. I walked back to the reception. I found my cousin Dana near the food table. I said, "I need 20 minutes. She said, "Of course." She said, "Go." I went to the backyard. I called Ruth. Ruth Pelham answered on the second ring. She said, "Sera." She said, "I was going to call you." She said, "I saw the registry notifications." She said, "I had been monitoring since the service started." She said, "I thought it was possible." She said, "I had hoped I was wrong." I said, "What did he file?" She said, 3 amendments. She said, "The first removed your name from the member list." She said, "The second changed the business name, removing Quinn." She said, "The third changed the registered agent to himself." I said, "He filed all 3 while I was at the service." She said, "Yes." I said, "He sat beside me at the graveside." She said, "Yes." I said, "He said my eulogy was beautiful." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes." I said, "Ruth." She said, "Yes." I said, "The partnership agreement." She said, "Yes." She said, "None of those amendments are valid." She said, "He cannot file unilateral amendments to a registered partnership." She said, "The dissolution clause requires your written consent for any structural change." She said, "He does not have your written consent." She said, "The amendments are void." She said she would file a challenge with the state registry this afternoon. She said the registry would reverse the amendments pending review. She said in her professional assessment the review would confirm the reversal because the partnership agreement was correctly drafted and properly filed, and the amendments violated it directly. I said, "How long?" She said the reversal could take 72 hours to process. She said the reversal would be retroactive to the time of the invalid filing. She said the business had not changed. She said it was still mine and Douglas's in the original proportions. She said it had never been anything else. I said, "Thank you, Ruth." She said, "Sera." She said, "I am sorry about your mother." She said she was the most prepared client I ever worked with. She said she thought of everything. I said, "Yes." I said she always did. If you have ever stood in a backyard on the day of a funeral holding a partnership agreement while your stepfather was inside accepting condolences for an erasure he had just filed, stay with me. Subscribe. So this story reaches you all the way to the end, because what happened at the family meeting 3 days later is the reason Douglas understood exactly what my mother had built and exactly how well she had built it. I did not confront Douglas that afternoon. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was afraid, not because I was too raw, because 40 people were in my mother's house eating food the neighbors had brought, and my mother deserved an afternoon of honest grief without a confrontation in her living room. She deserved that afternoon. I gave it to her. I went back inside. I accepted condolences. I thanked people for coming. I ate something. I sat with my grandmother for a while. I did not look at Douglas. I did not need to. The challenge was already filed. Ruth was already working. The partnership agreement was in my bag. Everything was in motion. I just had to wait for Monday. Douglas found out about the challenge on Sunday. I know because he called me Sunday evening. His voice was the specific version I had learned to recognize in the 18 months since my mother's diagnosis. The warm, managed version that he used when he needed something and was approaching the need indirectly. He said he wanted to talk. He said there had been a misunderstanding with some business filings. He said he had been trying to help with the transition. He said he had not realized there were complications. Complications? 3 amendments filed while I was at the funeral. Complications. I said I would see him Monday. He said Monday was fine. He said he was sure we could sort it out. I said yes. I said I was sure we could. I hung up. I texted Ruth. I said Monday morning. She said I will be there. I said bring everything. She said already packed. Monday morning. My mother's studio. The room where she had built everything, where she had died at her desk on a Thursday morning, finishing a client presentation. Ruth sat beside me. Douglas sat across from us. Beside him sat a man I did not recognize, who introduced himself as his advisor. Not an attorney, a financial advisor. The specific kind who sometimes sat in on meetings they were not equipped to navigate. I noted it. I placed the partnership agreement on the table. I placed the 3 amendment filings beside it. I placed Ruth's challenge filing on top. I placed the state registry's preliminary reversal notice beside that. The reversal had processed in 61 hours. The business was exactly as it had been. My name, Douglas's name, original proportions, unaltered. I let Douglas read everything. His advisor leaned over and read with him. The advisor turned to a page in the partnership agreement. He showed Douglas something. Douglas looked at it. He looked at Ruth. He said he had not understood the agreement. Ruth said that was apparent. He said he had thought that as the surviving spouse. Ruth said the business was not part of the marital estate. She said it was a registered LLC partnership with a separately filed partnership agreement. She said the agreement governed. She said the marital estate was irrelevant to the partnership structure. She said the amendments he had filed on Saturday were invalid under the agreement's dissolution clause. She said they had been reversed by the state registry. She said they had never had legal effect. Douglas looked at his advisor. The advisor had nothing to offer. He was a financial advisor. He knew numbers. He did not know partnership law. He should not have been in this room. Douglas looked at the table. He said he had thought the business would come to him. I said, "Why did you think that?" He said Claire was his wife. I said, "Yes." I said, "And the business was a partnership with a registered agreement naming me as partner." I said my mother structured it that way specifically. He said she never told me. I said I know. He said she knew I would want it. I said yes. He said, and she set it up so I could not have it. I did not answer immediately. I thought about the Tuesday evening. My mother tired and less guarded. I think I married him too soon. I said my mother built this business for 19 years. I said she built it before you knew her. I said she built it while raising me alone. I said she structured the partnership specifically to ensure it would be protected after she was gone. I said she did that because she understood what she had built and she made a decision about who should have it. He said she should have told me. I said yes. I said she should have. I said I cannot speak to why she did not. He said, "What happens now?" I said, "That is up to you." I said, "You hold no ownership in this business." I said, "The amendments were reversed." I said, "You have no standing in the partnership." He said, "What about Claire's share?" I said, "Her 80% passes through her estate." I said, "The will determines what happens to it." He said, "I am the primary beneficiary of her estate." I said, "You should speak with her estate attorney about the will." He looked at Ruth. Ruth said the estate was a separate matter from the partnership. She said she would be happy to discuss the will provisions separately. She said the partnership structure was settled. Douglas sat back. He looked at the studio, the design books on the shelf, the framed first logo, the client files, the specific texture of 19 years of work in every corner of the room. He said she built something here. I said yes. He said I did not understand how much until now. I said most people did not. He said she was remarkable. I said yes. I said she was. He looked at me. He said I am sorry for what I filed on Saturday. He said the timing was wrong. I said the timing was not the only thing that was wrong. He said I know. He said I panicked. He said I thought if I did not move quickly. He said I was afraid of being left with nothing. I said, "You are not left with nothing." I said my mother's estate is not nothing. He said I know. He said I am sorry. He said it plainly. No management underneath it. Just the words and what they cost him to say. I said I accept it. I said I need you to understand that the business is mine to run. He said I understand that now. I said if you have questions about the estate, Ruth will help you. He said thank you. He stood up. His advisor stood with him. He looked at the framed first logo on the wall. He said she was proud of this place. I said yes. He said I can see why. He left. The will left Douglas a fair share of my mother's personal assets. The house, her savings, her personal property, everything she had accumulated outside the business. He received it. I did not contest any of it. That was not mine to contest, and I had no desire to contest it. What was mine was the partnership, my 20% and the right to continue operating the business in the manner my mother had built. Her 80% passed through the estate to me as well. The will had named me as the beneficiary of her partnership interest. I had not known that until Ruth told me 2 weeks after the funeral. My mother had not mentioned it on the Saturday with the folder. She had let me read the partnership agreement and understand my 20%, and she had said nothing about the 80. She had kept it for the right moment. The right moment was 2 weeks after the funeral when Ruth placed the will on the table and pointed to the clause. I now held 100% of Marsh Quinn Creative Services, the business my mother had built for 19 years, the 40 clients, the 6 employees, the studio on the street 2 miles from home, all of it. Mine. The way she had decided it would be. Before Douglas had asked, before the diagnosis, before any of it. She had decided. She had filed. She had said the documents are correct. She had been right. I want to tell you about the Monday I came back to the studio, 2 weeks after the funeral, 2 weeks after the notifications, 2 weeks after Ruth's reversal and Douglas's apology and the specific rearrangement of everything. I came in at 8. The 6 employees were there. They had kept everything running for 2 weeks without being asked to, because they were the people my mother had hired, and my mother hired people who did not need to be asked to do the right thing. I stood in the studio, my mother's design books on the shelf, her framed first logo, her client files in the cabinet, her desk. I sat at her desk. I opened her laptop. Her email was still logged in. There were 14 unread client messages. I read each one. I responded to each one, not as my mother, as myself. As Sera Quinn, partner and now owner of Marsh Quinn Creative Services. I told each client what had happened. I told them the business would continue. I told them I had been my mother's partner for 3 years and her accountant for a decade before that, and that I intended to honor every relationship she had built. Every client responded, 39 of 40. Every response said some version of the same thing. We are with you. The 40th called. An older man who had been a client for 11 years. He said he was sorry about Claire. He said she had talked about me often. He said she had told him once that she had built the business the way she had specifically so that it would survive her. He said she had said her daughter was the reason it would. I said, thank you. He said she was right. I said, I know. He said, we are with you. I said, I know. I said, I will not let you down. He said, I know you won't. He said, Claire raised you. He said, that is all I need to know. The studio is still on the same street, 2 miles from the house where I grew up. The framed first logo is still on the wall. My mother's design books are still on the shelf. I have not changed much. I have added things. A second desk beside hers for the junior designer we hired 6 months after the funeral. A new client whose account my mother had been building toward for 2 years and that I closed 4 months after she died because I had been in the room for every conversation and I knew the relationship. A framed copy of the partnership agreement, not the original, a copy, framed beside the first logo, because some documents deserve to be seen, because the invisible work of filing the right agreement with the right language before the right threat arrives is the kind of work that looks like nothing until it is the only thing standing between what someone built and the person who was going to take it on a Saturday morning while her daughter was at the lectern. My mother filed it correctly. I keep it on the wall, so I remember. There is a business card in my wallet, not mine. Hers. Claire Quinn, Marsh Quinn Creative Services. The original card. From the first order she had printed 19 years ago. She had given it to me when the cards arrived. She had said, "Here." She had said, "This is where we start." I had been 23. I had not known what she meant. I know now. She meant the business. She also meant something larger than the business. She meant, this is where we start building something that will last. She meant, I want you to have a copy of the beginning so you remember what the middle and the end were built on. She gave me the card. I kept it. I look at it sometimes. On the difficult Mondays, on the days when a client is complicated or a decision is hard, or I miss her in the specific way of a daughter who learned everything from a woman who is no longer available for consultation. I look at the card. I remember where we started. I go back to work. That is my story. One Saturday morning. 3 amendments filed while I was at a lectern. A partnership agreement my mother had filed correctly, and a reversal that took 61 hours, and a business that is still on the same street 2 miles from where I grew up. If your mother built something, know what the documents say. Know the partnership agreement. Know the succession clause. Know the dissolution requirements. Know it the way she knew it because she built it and she filed it and she made sure the language was right. And if she is still here, ask her. Ask her what she built and how she built it and what the documents say. Ask her while she can still sit across the kitchen table and tell you, because the day you need the answer is not the day to be learning the question. My mother knew that. She had the answer ready. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.